Next Friday, athletes from around the globe will march into the Pyeongchang Olympic Stadium for the opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics. Among the competitors, athletes from the Pacific Northwest competing in sports like downhill skiing, bobsled, speed skating, and more. Even though the focus will be on the competition, you can't escape politics and diplomacy at the modern Olympics. That's especially true in Pyeongchang, which sits perilously close to the border with North Korea. Tonight, Pacific University professor and Olympic expert Jules Boykoff joins us to discuss the politics of the Olympics and the athletes he's paying close attention to this year. From KGW News, this is Straight Talk with Laurel Porter.
Good evening and thank you for joining us tonight for Straight Talk. I'm Laurel Porter. We are less than a week away from the 2018 Winter Olympic Games in Pyeongchang, South Korea. We'll all be watching the world's best athletes compete on a global stage, including many from the Northwest with big dreams. There's been a lot of tension surrounding these games. North and South Korea are two countries still technically at war, but the games may have brought at least a momentary diplomatic breakthrough. The Olympics are always loaded with politics, and tonight we have with us an Olympics expert. Professor Jules Boykoff has written 3 books on the subject, including Power Games, a political history of the Olympics. He has firsthand experience as an athlete, too. He played professional soccer and was a member of the U.S. Olympic soccer team in the 1990s. Boykoff currently teaches political science at Pacific University in Forest Grove. And later, we'll hear from our own Cassidy Quinn, who's on her way now to South Korea to cover the games. First, welcome to my guest, Professor Jules Boykoff. Thanks for joining us here on Straight Talk. Great to have you back.
Thanks, Laurel. Great to be here.
Always nice to talk to you about the Olympics as we get ready for it. They kick off next week. What are you most excited about?
Well, the sports fan in me is most excited about the sports. It's going to be amazing. There's all sorts of really awesome athletes that are going to be there. The social justice part of me is excited about the prospect of some principled athlete activism. And the political science side of me is certainly interested in the fact that it's become glaringly apparent that sports is politics by other means. And, you know, the political angles on these Olympics are really, really interesting. If nothing else, the Pyeongchang 2018 Games should mark the death knell of the myth that the Olympics and politics don't mix. After all, the International Olympic Committee has been pushing politics in particular ways that we can talk about.
Well, there's so much to watch, and you mentioned the politics. There's been some concern about security with the host country so close, neighboring North Korea, the escalating tension between President Trump and North Korean President Kim Jong-un. But there seems to be at least a little bit of reason to hope for peace with the announcement last month that there would be a unified North and South Korean team. What do you make of that?
It's really interesting, and I do think it's a positive sign. Let's not forget the 1988 Olympics in Seoul, which was the last time that South Korea hosted the Olympics, brought some serious tragedy. Just ahead of those Olympics, North Korean agents detonated a bomb on a plane, killing more than 115 people. So, I mean, there's serious business at play here. And so, really, having North Korea participate in these Olympics is super meaningful, if nothing else, for the reason that it's pretty much the best missile insurance that South Korea can get at this point. But hey, we still have a few days until the Olympics come, and the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has been jumping up and down saying he's really upset about the way that South Koreans have been treating the possibility of his athletes coming down there. There's been protests in South Korea, and Kim Jong-un is not happy about it.
Well, you mentioned the crash. It was later learned that they did that to try to destabilize South Korea and scare people away from the Olympics. So South Koreans have reason to be a little skeptical. How is this playing with them?
Yes, it's playing really well internationally, but in South Korea, it's really not playing that well. There's very little support for the athletes marching in behind a unified flag, for example. There's very little support for the unified hockey team that we'll see, the women's hockey team.
And that's just women. Why wasn't it the men's team, too?
I think that's a great question, Laurel, and I think there's a little bit of sexism in that decision to basically say to the women's team, guess what, you are going to be the ones that unify for the sake of the countries. It's still going to be interesting. It's not that the coach of the South Korean hockey team is thrilled about it, but she's doing her best to integrate the North Korean players, and it will be historic. I mean, the last time that South Korea and North Korea teamed up was 1991 for a unified team. That wasn't for the Olympics, it was for an international ping pong tournament and for a youth soccer tournament. So this is a big deal. Now, South Korea and North Korea have marched into the Olympics at the opening ceremony, as they're slated to do this year. They've done it before in 2000, 2004, and 2006, so that's not necessarily new, but the hockey team is new, and it doesn't come without controversy.
Well, it should be poignant to see both the North and South Koreans walking together with that unified flag. We have a shot of the flag that you can watch for the Olympics, the blue peninsula silhouetted against the white background. You know, a lot of people have noticed this Twitter spat between President Trump and Kim Jong-un. Do you think that will continue through the Olympics? What are the implications of that?
Well, the implications are very serious. Sometimes I have to check myself when Donald Trump sends out another bellicose tweet aimed at what he calls Little Rocket Man, because it just seems so fictional almost. But there are serious consequences that we need to be aware of. Both of these individuals can put their finger on the button of nuclear weaponry. That could be a total tragedy, and we don't want to forget that fact. You know, what will we see? Trump likes to be in the spotlight. He's shown that, if nothing else, over the last year or so of his presidency.
And Kim Jong-un is really getting a lot of attention with this unification and this sort of peace deal.
Very much so. Some people have been saying these are the Pyongyang Olympics instead of the Pyeongchang Olympics because of all the attention that North Korea is getting right now. And so we'll see what happens. President Trump has sent a delegation, including Vice President Mike Pence, to be there at the Olympics. President Trump will not be there himself, but I'm sure his Twitter thumbs will be plenty busy during the games.
Well, you mentioned Vice President Mike Pence leading the U.S. delegation. The Winter Games typically see fewer athlete protests. Do you think that these will be different? Some of the athletes aren't happy that Vice President Pence is leading the delegation.
That's absolutely right, including figure skater Adam Rippon, who has spoken out vociferously about the choice of Mike Pence leading the delegation, because after all, Mike Pence has a terrible track record when it comes to LGBTQ issues, and Adam Rippon is an out gay skater. There's another out gay athlete, Gus Kenworthy, who we'll see participating in skiing, freestyle skiing. And he also has said that he's not happy about the fact that Mike Pence will be leading the delegation. So that really pushes forth the possibility that we could see athletes speaking out against Mike Pence. We've also seen people like high-profile skier Lindsey Vonn saying that she would not go talk to President Trump, wouldn't go to the White House. She's definitely not representing the president, she said, heading into these Olympics. So, you know, there's a lot going on in the United States that could galvanize dissent, and there have been plenty of athletes have sort of hinted from the United States that they might like to do something in Pyeongchang politically.
You mentioned to me earlier bobsledder Alana Myers-Taylor that she might protest. Do you think that will happen?
Well, she has said in the past that she does not necessarily think that it's the job of athletes to simply remain as quiet role models and to have their actions speak for themselves, and that they should feel free to speak out on these issues.
What do you think? Should they be able to speak out?
Absolutely. I think that we should not ask athletes to check their brains in at the door when they participate in the Olympics. That's not to say that all athletes should become athlete activism or athlete activists. After all, you know, there's going to be a lot of backlash if you decide to do that. But if there is an athlete who has done the background work, really cares about an issue, is passionate and wishes to put themselves out there, I support them absolutely.
We're not going to see the Russian flag in Pyeongchang. The Russian team has been banned because of the doping scandal during the Sochi Olympics. But Russia is still sending 169 athletes, almost as big as the previous Winter Games. So what do you make with that? How does that work?
Well, just stepping back, I mean, the doping crisis with Russia is sort of like a Cold War thriller novel, with urine samples getting passed through a little hole in the wall, a whistleblower who's now living in the United States under the protection of the U.S. federal government. He was a guy who says he made these special cocktails, things like the Duchess, he called them, including vermouth and these different performance-enhancing substances. So it's like a Cold War thriller novel. And the International Olympic Committee, who oversees the Games, has acted with willful gullibility when it comes to this doping crisis. I mean, if you could get an Olympic medal for foot dragging, the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, would be winning gold. They have done the bare minimum. They've known about this since 2013, and they've just dragged their feet repeatedly and repeatedly, putting ourselves in this situation where we now have a bunch of athletes that just went through the review process and were cleared of doping. We might actually see more than 160 plus athletes. We might see more athletes in Pyeongchang than we saw in Vancouver from Russia. Now, the one thing they'll tell us is that they don't get to wear their special Russian uniforms, although they will have a patch that says Olympic athletes from Russia. So even that is kind of special treatment in the sense that they won't be neutral athletes per se, but they'll be Olympic athletes from Russia.
These 28 athletes that just had the ban overturned by the IOC, will they automatically get to be in the Olympics next week, or what happens to them?
They will not automatically get to participate. In fact, the International Olympic Committee head, Tomas Bach, the president of the organization, has said that they will not unless they get an invitation from the International Olympic Committee. There's a lot of people that follow this stuff very closely that feel like Tomas Bach and the International Olympic Committee were trying to push for lifetime bans against these athletes, and that was overturned by this other Court of Arbitration of Sport body, that by doing that, he was actually being extremely savvy because he knew they'd never stand up in court. And so in a way, Tomas Bach and the Olympic movement gets to look really tough, like they're trying to clamp down on the Russians, knowing full well that the good lawyers in the room would never let that happen. And guess what? It hasn't.
Well, this isn't a winter sport, but what's been happening with USA Gymnastics has really cast a big shadow over the U.S. Olympic Committee. The trial and conviction of Dr. Larry Nassar, the former team doctor for USA Gymnastics, exposed something deeply disturbing at the heart of the American Olympic sport, and some have even called it a national disgrace. To recap, Nassar was sentenced to 40 to 175 years in Michigan State Prison for sexually assaulting young girls. More than 150 testified at his trial. Many of them were members of the U.S. Olympic team. After the sentencing, the USOC threatened to decertify USA Gymnastics until the governing board dismissed its entire board of directors, which they did. Professor, do you think that's enough? Should there be more punishment?
I think we are going to see more punishment as more facts emerge. I mean, this has been horrific, and we really have to hand it to these women athletes who've had the courage to speak out. It's been incredibly poignant listening to their powerful testimony. It's so important to hear their voices and not forget about those voices as we think about accountability as well. But there's been some evidence that the United States Olympic Committee has known about this for a few years as well, going back to 2015 at least. And so the USOC, the United States Olympic Committee, has not necessarily been touched by this, no resignations yet, but that could be the next card to fall.
Okay, well, stay tuned for that. There are other troubles for the International Olympic Committee. In an essay you wrote that was published in December, you said doping is only one problem, albeit a huge one, among many plaguing the Olympic Games, including chronic overspending, egregious greenwashing, a pattern of leaving unused stadiums in their wake, and the militarization of the public sphere in the Olympic host city. In Pyeongchang, overall costs have doubled from around $6 billion to over $13 billion. An ancient forest was chopped down to make way for an Olympic ski run, and ticket sales are lagging. You and I have talked about this situation in other Olympics too. What do the people of South Korea think about this?
I'm glad you mentioned this because this all too often gets lost in the mix of excitement leading into the games. And South Koreans wouldn't want us to forget that. After all, they're paying the bill for these Olympics for us to enjoy. As you said, double the original cost, which has become quite common with the Olympics. They say they're going to cost one thing on the front end, and in reality, they cost much, much more. What I meant by greenwashing from that quote that you pulled was that the Olympic movement always talks about being really concerned about the environment, but they don't necessarily walk that in reality. And so with the destruction of this 500-year-old tree stand to make way for 15 days of skiing has people up in arms there. This is a really special and protected area. There's flying squirrels that are protected species that live there, lynx, special trees that are only on the Korean peninsula, wiped out to make way for this ski run.
People didn't have any say in that.
No, I mean, happened, there was some protesters, so I guess you could say they had some say. There was some protests that occurred around this, but they were basically steamrolled to make way for the Olympics, and that's pretty common. We're already seeing almost the same situation emerging in China. In Beijing, they'll host the Olympics in 2022, the next Winter Olympics. And we also see a crisis emerging there around trees that are being cut down to make way for just a short-term ski festival. So that's something that I doubt we're going to hear as much about, but the South Koreans will be happy that we're at least talking about it now, and hopefully future cities for the Olympics will think long and hard about it before jumping in on that.
Professor, it's time for us to take a break. But when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the athletes that you'll be watching. We'll also check in with our own Cassidy Quinn, who is on her way right now to South Korea. We're back in 2 minutes.